Edge Radio.
Good evening, everyone. How you going? This is Wayne Brown on Edge Radio Australia with my show, The Talkie Show. Now, before we go too far, I do have the comments on. If you'd like to, put up a question while I'm doing the show, feel free to do so. I'll do my best to answer it as quickly as I can. In the meantime, I have picked myself a question, as I do for my guests, so that I can explore that, or we can explore it if I'm doing the guest show on the alternate Tuesdays. And as it's just me, you're going to have to listen to my exploration. So my question tonight was, are you living your life on autopilot? Now, for anyone that's ever learnt anything about flying, a plane actually uses autopilot where it maintains flight without any input from the pilots. In other words, it's on automatic. And what I'm doing is I'm talking tonight about it in relation to your life. So I'll be exploring that. I'll be giving you some questions, things to ponder about autopilot in your own life, and hopefully nudge you to do something about it. Now, I do have my notes here, so I will be referring to this as I go along. One of the things I'd like you to do before we get too far into it is do a bit of a self-check. Now, for myself, I know I've certainly been guilty of autopilot in the past and still do it occasionally. There's reasons for that I'm going to go into. But think about your life yesterday. What happened yesterday? How much of your life was on autopilot? Did you drive to work without thinking? Did you get up and just make your coffee, brush your teeth, everything like that without thinking? Was it all on autopilot? When you were at work, when you were doing your job, was it all on autopilot? Were you not sort of thinking? Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, because autopilot can help us to get through things. However, we're looking at where we are on autopilot, where being conscious about what we're doing would give us a better result. So have a think about what you were doing yesterday in your life and how much of it was on autopilot. You know, when you got up and prepared for work, when you were at work, when you got home from work, did you come home straight away and just pop down on the lounge and start watching television? Things like this are things that are automatic. We don't think about it. It's a hardwired thing. And once we become aware or conscious, same with anything in life, once you become conscious or aware, then you can start to do something about it. So have a think about your own life and where you're doing autopilot. Now, the good thing, I suppose, about using autopilot is it doesn't drain your brain as much. You see, our brains are wired to be lazy. Now, the reason we do this is because our brain operation chews up a lot of our energy. And the more stuff that our brain has where it doesn't have to think, it doesn't have to analyze, it doesn't have to weigh things up, then it's not using energy. It's not using up valuable energy that can be used elsewhere. Now, these things that are on autopilot often are things that are repetitive in our lives, i.e. things like our commute. So if you wanted to break your autopilot on your commute, you'd try driving a different path on the way to work. Every now and then, you don't have to do it every day, but just every now and then, just to break up the autopilot and keep your brain at least reasonably alert. And these sorts of things are what we need to do to break out of this rut of autopilot. Now, the good thing, if we can break out of them, we can start to focus more on meaningful decisions in our life. So instead of coming home and just flopping in front of the television and watching something, it's what can I do to move my life forward? Would I go and read a book? Would I listen to a podcast and learn something? Would I go and engage more with family and friends with meaningful conversation rather than just turning the brain off and watching television. So it's one of those things where what can I do to start moving out of autopilot and becoming more conscious, more having greater control over my life. Now, the other thing you want to consider with autopilot is, like I said, if you're flopping down in front of the television instead of listening to a podcast that could broaden your knowledge or learn a language or whatever, that then allows you to move forward. So another thing you can do is look at your life, where you're doing autopilot, where it's holding you back, and where it could be moving you forward if you decided to step away from doing the autopilot. So these sorts of questions are worth considering. Now, I know for myself in the past, I have very often done autopilot. I've had times when, and I don't know about yourself, but think about this. How much of your last year, so it's now 2026, how much of 2025 can you recall? How much of it was on autopilot? Did you go whole weeks without really being conscious of what was going on? Because if you're living life like that, it might be worth considering, how can I move away from autopilot and become more conscious with my life? And again, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, and you don't have to do massive changes. You get some people that think these sorts of prompts are designed to get you to make massive changes in your life. People can't make massive changes in their life. It tends to be overwhelming. What we're looking at is small incremental steps that you can take that will make your life improve over time when you repeat those choices over and over again. So the more that you repeat these, the more you're going to be able to make great change in your life. For example, let's say you have autopilot, you get up in the morning, you make your coffee, you have your breakfast, you go to work. Let's say you decided to become healthier and fitter. Now, you could say to yourself, right, I'm going to go to the gym 3 days a week and I'm going to work out for 2 hours. I'm going to do this program. I'm going to gain X amount of muscle and lower my heart rate by this much and all of this. For some people, or probably a lot of people, that would be overwhelming. One thing you can do to break the autopilot is get up in the morning, do 5 push-ups. Now, that sort of thing, you're going to miss the occasional one because you're breaking an autopilot habit. So you get up in the morning, you do your 5 push-ups, and it's one of those things where as long as you're prompted and you get down there, you're down there, you do 1, you may as well do 5. So you get into that habit. And then once that becomes hardwired into your brain, that then becomes your autopilot, because the brain doesn't have to think about it. You get up, you do your 5 push-ups, then you go and you make your coffee, have your breakfast, go to work. So it's that incremental change that's repeated that slowly overrides your autopilot. So your autopilot could be a response to conversation. It could be who you contact. It could be how you react in a particular situation. It's becoming more conscious in your choices rather than having the autopilot. Now, as I said, we can go often a period of time without being aware that we're on autopilot. I don't know about you, but in the past, I've had times when I've been driving and I'll suddenly go, oh, how did I get here? And I'm not aware of the last 5 minutes of driving. That's a severe case of autopilot. You're daydreaming, you drift off, your brain just keeps you moving and keeping you in the lane and everything like that. Now, that's all okay as long as nothing happens. But if someone suddenly brakes, your autopilot's on, you may not even be aware of that, and suddenly, bang, you have an accident, and then you're in big trouble. So becoming more conscious and breaking that autopilot can be a very important thing, especially if it's going to save your life. Like I said, the big thing we can do is that small change. So ask yourself, if you were going to change your life incrementally, remember, we're always looking at incrementally. We don't want to look at massive change because it doesn't tend to happen like that. Change happens repeatedly. No matter how small the option that you choose, if you repeat it enough, it becomes hardwired into your brain. And this has been proven with numerous studies that your neural pathways are strengthened through repetition. So ask yourself, if I was to make a change in my life, where would I like to make the change so I can move away from autopilot? And what would be the small, easily repeatable thing that I could do on a regular basis to rewire my autopilot? So these sorts of things go a long way to changing your life. Now, I know for myself, I've had to work on numerous things, and it can be challenging because you're also working on your autopilot of things, which is your beliefs, your reactions, your behaviors, your limitations, your habits. All of these things are hardwired, i.e., they're an autopilot response in your brain that you need to rewire so that you can get a better result. So, again, if you were going to change your life in any aspect, whether it's your relationships, your mindset, your emotions, your conflict resolution, whatever it is, where would you like to get the change, and what would be your small, repeatable step that you could do to overcome that autopilot or rewire that autopilot response? Now, if you're struggling implementing this, start looking at what are the autopilot responses? What's the habit that's kicking in to stop you? Is there a little voice in your head that is saying something that is keeping you from getting that response? So these are the things you need to look at when you want to try and make a change in your life of some form. A good prompt to use if you're going to look at changing your life in some form is when you're looking at these habits, these reactions, who decided them for you? Did you decide it? Did you have it modeled for you? Was it drummed into you? Let's say, for example, you want to save money. Now, I know for myself, many years ago, I had a glass ceiling with my savings. And it took me a long time to recognize it, where I would save $3,000, and that was my glass ceiling. That was the one where I would save $3,000, and then my car would die, and I would have to buy a new car. So I had to then look at, what are my beliefs around money? What are the things that are holding me back in response to my savings? I had to look at what had created the glass ceiling, what I had to reestablish in regards to my habits, my beliefs, my attitudes, my reactions, so that, I could remove that glass ceiling and start saving more money. Now, it did take me some time because sometimes these beliefs, habits, reactions, etc., are very deeply ingrained and we don't recognize them because we're on autopilot with them. So you may need to look at where a belief came from. Was it modeled? Was it drummed into you? Was it repeated often? Do you have a limiting belief that was repeated often enough so that you now believe that thing about yourself when there's no evidence to prove that it was true? So looking at limiting beliefs is another one that can take us out of autopilot. Now, that's a good question. I'll answer that in 2 seconds. Here's a good example. I believed for many years that I was not good at public speaking. I was terrified to speak up in front of a group of any sort. And then I went and did Toastmasters. And Toastmasters gives you 10 different speeches to do that builds on your skills so that you can become better and better at public speaking. And what I realized was there were limitations or beliefs that had been put on me that led me to believe I couldn't do public speaking. And what I realized doing Toastmasters was I have particular skills in regards to public speaking that other people can't do. They can't bring them to fruition when they're doing public speaking. So I found that not only could I do it, there were some things I was better at than most people. Now, someone's just popped in a question there. Beautiful question. Who puts these limitations on you? Now, that is a very long answer because there are many things that contribute to these limitations. Now, let's start from when we're children. We have limitations given to us by our parents. Now, our parents are often well-meaning. They care about us. They want to keep us safe. They want to make sure that we become all we can be. However, sometimes their limitations are given to us because they will say something which is intended to keep us safe, and it might be something like, don't try that, you'll hurt yourself. So that belief becomes drummed in so that we won't take risks. So that aversion to risk can be drummed into us by our parents from a young age, and therefore we don't want to try doing certain things because then we won't be safe, and it's going against that limitation that's been given to us by our parents. Our educational system, a classic way to have our limitations, where we have it drummed into us at school that there's only one right answer. I don't know about yourself, but I remember years ago I did training to be a scout leader because my young son's scout troop was going to lose their scout leader, and I stepped up to become one. And as part of our training, they were getting us to look at our own imagination limitations. And they said, how many different uses can you come up with for a tarpaulin? And we came up with about 50 or 60 different uses. Now, school tends to teach you there's only one real way to do anything. So therefore, it tends to hedge in our imaginational limits so that we don't tend to think too much. So a lot of people would think just a tarpaulin of usual size. Well, what happens if the tarpaulin is massive and you can cover a whole community or a whole country? What happens then when the tarpaulin's that big, or it's made of a different material, or it's whatever? There's so many different things you can do to open that up. So if you had a limitation put on you by the educational system, you're not going to be as imaginative as you could be. You could have had a limitation put on you by a partner, by your peer group, by your community, by your culture, by your religion or faith. All of these things can give you limitations. You know, don't tell a lie is a good one. We're told that you should always be honest, but sometimes you need to lie. Not bad, not to cause any harm. We're doing it to protect people. So sometimes we'll tell little white lies so that we can protect people or preserve things being a particular way. So these limitations aren't necessarily a bad thing. So the thing I always ask myself when I'm analysing something is this particular belief, attitude, reaction, whatever, is that moving me forward or is it holding me back? So that's always a good question to ask. Is it moving me forward or is it moving me back? So if you want to look at your own limitations, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It could be something that stops you from doing something really stupid, because we look at people that are very extroverted and they're willing to give everything a crack, and that can be a good thing. However, if you don't sit and analyze things a little bit first, you can go and make a bad decision, and that could lead to disaster. However, on the opposite side, if you're more introverted and reserved and cautious, you may be hesitant to even try to do anything. Therefore, that limitation is a bad thing. However, if it does cause you to question something so that you don't make that poor decision, that limitation from being an introvert can be a good thing. So you have to look at, is that limitation that's been put on me a good thing or a bad thing, and being relative to you as an individual, is that moving me forward, i.e. a good thing, or is it holding me back, i.e. a bad thing? So that's always a good question to ask yourself with any limitation. And once you look at whether it's moving you forward or backwards, then you can decide whether you keep it, whether you rewire it, whether you get rid of it, whether you embrace it. Then it's up to you. You become less autopilot-ish and you become more conscious in your journey, your decisions, etc., so that you can move forward in your life a lot better than what you may have been ordinarily. Okay, so the question I've got here is, who decided that for you, and is it still true? Because everything, even with a bad limitation or limitation holding you back, there could be a degree of truth. Now, the things that I believed about public speaking and what some of my fears were I would stand up there and I would maybe make a mistake and people would think I was an idiot. They'd judge me. They'd reject me. They'd think I was a fool. I would suddenly feel unworthy. And one thing I did is often I would just have some bullet points like I'm doing here, and I would just talk from what was in my mind, what was in my heart, what was in my consciousness, so that I could sort of free-form it. And one day I decided to experiment. I created a speech. It was 6 to 7 minutes, and I learnt it word for word because I wanted to experiment how different my speech would be if I crafted it and I spent time thinking about what words to put in there, what phrases, where to focus to give people emphasis so that they get the message. And I learnt it word for word. And then when I was giving it to the club, I was talking away and then suddenly I forgot a word. And that word was a bridge between two parts of the speech. And because I'd forgotten it, I didn't have that bridge anymore and I couldn't get to the next part of the speech. And therefore I stalled. And I did look foolish in my eyes, so that I didn't do that again. Because the good thing is, if I'm free-forming it, no one knows if I've forgotten something. No one knows if I've skipped a bit. No one knows that I might have stumbled and lost my place because I'm not pausing. So that limitation of I need to study it and make sure I've got it all done full on and perfect, I realized that that was a limitation that would impose something on me that would stop me from being natural and being able to flow easily. So analyzing that limitation enabled me to find where I could comfortably sit and be authentic and congruent with who I am. So if you're looking at your own limitations, like I said, look at who may have given it to you. It could be someone who had it with good intentions, which means there could be a grain of truth in it. Or it could be someone who was trying to hold you back. It could be someone who wasn't thinking before they gave you the limitation. So these sorts of things you need to analyze if you're going to be able to move away from autopilot. So it could be, you'll never be good at this particular sport. So a lot of the times, the only person that knows whether we're going to be good at something is us, because we don't know until we give it a try. Like when I started doing these shows, I didn't know if I could do it or not until I started giving it a go. And you know what? I can do it, but I wouldn't have known until I gave it a go. So you won't know what your limitations are until you give them a go. So analyze them, get out, give it a go, find out what your new path is, engrave it into your autopilot. Therefore, it becomes part of your muscle memory or your brain memory, and then you'll be able to do it a lot easier. So those sorts of things are the things that will change your life for the better, especially if you can go for that incremental change that I was talking about. Okay, here's a little question for you to ponder, because I want to give you things to think about. I want you to think about where your life is going and whether you're on autopilot or whether you're conscious in what you're creating. And this is the question, and I want you to think about this one. If you kept living exactly the way you are right now, on autopilot, doing what you're doing, where would it take you in 5 years? Now, if you think back to where you were 5 years ago, are you in exactly the same place as where you were 5 years ago, i.e. the same job, the same relationship, the same circle of friends, the same hobbies, the same mindset, the same reactions? All of these things aren't necessarily a bad thing. Like your relationship, it could be a good relationship, but if you're not consciously working on it, if you're just humming along and not really doing anything to improve it, well, then that relationship hasn't really changed. It's on autopilot. If you're in the same job and you're not doing anything to improve your value to the company or to improve your ability to do your job, therefore, you could be on autopilot, especially if you haven't changed in 5 years. Are the circle of friends that you're choosing, are they keeping you in the same spot? Now, that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. However, we should all be evolving. We should all be changing. We should all be becoming more conscious about what we're doing. We should all be crafting and sculpting the life that we want through conscious decision as we analyze our beliefs, our attitudes, the removal of our limitations, and getting away from autopilot as much as we can. Yes, there's going to be things that are going to stay predominantly on autopilot. And again, that's not a bad thing if it's not stopping you or holding you back at all. So if your autopilot's allowing you, for example, let's say you want to be able to not be totally autopilot with your driving. You want to be a little more conscious so that you're not having an accident, but you want to be able to listen to a podcast that you're learning a new language on, because that half hour in your commute or 3/4 of an hour or whatever it is, you've decided is going to be spent learning a language so that you can become a better version of yourself and travel. So that sort of thing is where you're analyzing your autopilot and you're deciding where you're going to become more conscious, where you're going to move away from autopilot. So we're getting close to the end of the show. I only keep these to a half an hour so you don't have to listen to me waffle on too much. I want to finish with this for you to think about, to ponder, so that you can start to make change in your life. I want you to finish this sentence as many times as you can. I realized I was on autopilot when. So this could be in relation to your relationships, your conflict resolution, your habits, your limitations, your beliefs about yourself, all of these sorts of things. So ponder that question. I realized I was on autopilot when. Now, like I've said at each of these shows, during the show, everyone's free to put up questions like someone did tonight. That was wonderful. Thank you very much. If the show isn't on and you want to send a question in, you got feedback, you want me to elaborate on something, you've got a problem or a challenge that you're facing and you want to get my opinion for what it's worth, send an email to thetalkietalkieshow at gmail.com, and that's talkie as in TALKIE, all one word, thetalkietalkieshow at gmail.com, and I'll answer it on the following show. Now, that's every second Tuesday I do that. On the alternate Tuesdays, I have a guest in, which means next week I will have a guest in. They will have a question to ponder and explore with myself on the show so that we can get information to hopefully give you impetus and a catalyst to change your own life. So if you've enjoyed the show, give me feedback. I'd love to hear it. If there's something you think will make it better, feel free to send that in as well. I'd love to hear it. So join me next week for the guests that I'll have on to explore a question or a theme. If you have a suggestion for a question or a theme, feel free to send that through. Be wonderful to explore that with my guest. So otherwise, listen into the replay on Sundays at 10 p.m. Otherwise, look after yourself. Stay awesome. And I'll catch you next Tuesday. And until then, look after yourself.
Edge Radio.